wonderful thing that Mike Collins said is everywhere they went, they were toured around in India, in Africa, in Latin America, in Europe. They were toured around the astronauts when they got back. And Mike Collins said, people rushed up to us and said, "We did it." The landing on the moon, the Apollo mission, it was publicly funded. This wasn't about private commercial interest. This wasn't about very wealthy people like Elon Musk thinking, well, I'll use some of my enormous capital to make this. This was a publicly funded, publicly supported project run by and with the help of many public institutions. But he knows that it's going to ask a lot. He says, if I were to say, my fellow citizens, that we shall send to the moon 24,000 miles away from the control station in Houston, a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall, the length of this football field, made of new alloys, some of which have not yet been invented. He knew that you were actually setting huge technological challenges to do something they couldn't even do and think of doing there and then. Standing heat and stresses, more than have ever been experienced, with a precision better than the finest watch. Interesting, it's the watch analogy and not computer analogy at that stage. Carrying all the equipment we need for guidance, control, communications, food, and survival on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and then return it safely to Earth. Re-entering the atmosphere of speeds over 25,000 miles per hour, causing heat about half of that of the temperature of the sun, almost as hot as it is here today in Houston. He reminds them, he brings them back to where they are, to the moment. But he's actually inviting them to say, be inspired by this, see what science will have to do. And he was right. New technologies were built, new alloys were made, new ways that had not even been conceived had to be very fast planned, conceived, and tried to make this possible. And also, when we think of it as a human achievement, you have to realize that, you've got human beings who are usually pilots flying their own craft, feeling enormously in control of what they do. That's not how it is when you're waiting to be launched by a Saturn V rocket. In effect, you're strapped to a missile where you have no control, and it's going to fire, and it will either work and go in the direction that the people on the ground programmed it to do, or it won't. And it's usually a good thing to ask an astronaut. Don't just ask them, how did it feel to be looking at the moon or walking the moon? Ask them, what happened in your space flight or space mission that you hadn't expected? What was the thing you weren't expecting and you were surprised by? And quite a lot of them say the noise and the shaking on launch, the vibration and the terrific noise. One of the astronauts described it as, you felt as though you were strapped to a wild animal. That's a tremendous thing to put yourself at the mercy of, tremendous personal courage. But also, what the moon landing represents 50 years on was one of the greatest ever management projects that's ever been achieved. Publicly funded project using more than 53 universities, using the technology of many people in the public sphere and the people in mission control. And the people in mission control, you don't really necessarily know what they do because they have these technical terms. So the flight controllers are all responsible for particular things, for the retrofiring of the rockets coming back, for the flight dynamics, for guidance, for control of the lunar module, for instrumentation, for guidance, navigation, control, energy, consumables, and finally a surgeon who determines whether the people whose hearts and vital signs they're measuring are okay to do this. And many of you have heard that very famous piece of audio when you've got Gene Kranz going around the room. He said, I'm going to go around the room and I want a go, no-go decision on whether we go for landing, whether or not we descend to the moon. And he says, retro, go, FIDO, go, guidance, go, control, go, telecom, go, GINSI, go, econ, go, surgeon, go. If any one of them had said no go, it was off, it was finished. All of that work, all of that money, it would have been over. And the guy who did most was a guy called Steve Bales, who was on guidance, because when they got a computer signal a 12:01 alarm and then a 12:02 alarm just minutes before landing on the moon. It went to Steve Bales, and he said, go. I'll overrule what the computer is telling us. It's a false alarm. Enormous judgment, enormous courage, but enormous dependence on all of those people. You have to remember Buzz Aldrin's lovely remark. He was asked, what goes through your mind when you're strapped into the command module waiting for the launch of the Saturn V rocket? And he said, what goes through my mind is that every single component of this rocket was made by the bidder who made the lowest tender to do it. That's because it was a publicly funded mission, right? And we know that. We know what the pressures are. This is, again, enormous trust, enormous teamworking, enormous collaboration. And of course, when we see the people who did it, we realize that, it was more, one of the biggest spin-offs was not just the technology, but how to plan and coordinate a project on that scale, how to keep people together, how to have them give their best, how to keep them focused on the achievement. And of course, it wasn't just men. If you look at mission control, you see all the men in their short sleeves, usually smoking at the time. But it was also people like Margaret Hamilton, who produced the software coding, because she was a software director of software engineering at MIT. And look at Margaret Hamilton. This is her code. Now, you may think, my God, that's a lot. No, that's a little. In those days, every bit of extra code required extra computation, that required extra resource, that required extra weight in the spacecraft. So the beautiful thing about Margaret Hamilton's work is the code is extremely spare. She's not wasting any commands, any additional coding lines that would take more time, suck up more juice. Nowadays, we've got elephant code. People can code in any way they want because they've got the hardware to absorb it and to do it. Then you didn't. So you had to be a really good coder. So this was some of the best work you could do. By the way, Margaret Hamilton's usually credited with the invention of the word software. So there she is at work. She's sitting in the command module. And of course, it's not surprising, given how spare the code was. Less power, as we know, than the sort of the chips you've got in your washing machine and certainly in your smartphone. Not surprising that as they're landing, you overload the computer and you get those 2 alarms coming out. And now we also know that there were people like Dorothy Vaughan, Katherine Johnson, and Mary Jackson who were called computers because they were doing the computing, the calculations, the maths behind the trajectories and the landings. These were also incredibly important figures, now recognized, now rewarded, but treated with much less dignity at the time. But there's something about the 50-year celebration that allows us to bring them out and to celebrate them. And that's a good thing. But the other thing is the legacy of Kennedy that matters. Kennedy was setting this mission for people to do, and he knew how important it was for technology. He said, transit satellites are helping our ships at sea to steer a safer course. Tyros satellites have given us unprecedented warnings of hurricanes and storms, and will do the same for fires, forest fires and icebergs. The growth of our science and education will be enriched by new knowledge of our universe and the environment, by new techniques of learning and mapping and observation, by new computers for industry, medicine, and the home. That's a staggering thought in 1962, that you're anticipating that people will have these huge devices at home. The foresight of this is just extraordinary. And he says, technical institutions such as Rice, University of Rice, where he's speaking, will reap the harvest of these gains. So it will give back to the universities. And of course, the moon landing inspired a hell of a lot of the science that we subsequently got in the 70s and 80s, and especially with the sort of computational tools and power we have now. It is for these reasons, he said, that I regard the decision last year to shift our efforts in space from low to high gear as among the most important decisions that will be made during my incumbent office of the presidency. And a year later, he was dead. Very prescient, very, very prescient to know he has to set this challenge. And I think also the desire, the teamwork, the sense of mission was also a response to that being one of the last things that was supposed to be a legacy for Kennedy. This was an age of optimism. We know some terrible things about Kennedy now. As people say, I'll never forget where I was when he almost blew us to bits in the Bay of Pigs. But nonetheless, we know that at the time it was a time of tremendous optimism. And this was a desire to carry that out and fulfill it and realize it. But it was also very important to remember Kennedy's mission. It wasn't to get to the moon. It was the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth. That was hard to do. That was really hard to do. Think of how differently we would be viewing the mission, the 50th anniversary, if they had not been able to blast off from the surface, if that had become their tomb, if that was a place where these humans had died and we had agonizingly waited until they ran out of oxygen and food. Very, very different. But to bring them home safely was the mission. Very human desire to go there and return safely. So when they blast off and the top of the lunar module is coming back to Mike Collins, he's going to collect them. He had training to go down further to the moon. If they didn't get into a high enough orbit, he was supposed to sweep down and get them. Enormously dangerous and difficult thing to do. And only when they get back, only when they splash down and are picked up by the helicopters, then you've completed the mission. Then you've done what mattered. So let's return to this moment, the giant leap for mankind. As we said, mass participation events, screens out all over the world, people watching and sharing it. They knew they were sharing the same moment. Very important. But there was also a shared sense of achievement. Wonderful thing that Mike Collins said is everywhere they went, they were toured around in India, in Africa, in Latin America, in Europe. They were toured around the astronauts when they got back. And Mike Collins said, people rushed up to us and said, we did it. We did it. They thought of it as an achievement for humans. They were joining in. They were feeling part of that. That was a moment. I don't think we can quite capture the same thing. And look at the personnel. Look at the crew. Neil Armstrong is in some ways the everyman. There's something, haven't you always felt it a little bit boring about Neil Armstrong? He was so reliable. He was so boring. He was an everyman. He was an any man. It didn't really matter. But the choice of crew was really important. These two were vital. Buzz Aldrin, a professional member of the Awkward Squad, a really difficult guy. But he was a risk taker. He was someone who had the fight and the energy. If things went very badly wrong, he was the guy who they thought was going to get them out of there. Mike Collins is one of the most amazing astronauts, I think, that goes often unnoticed. He was so calm. He was calm, he was funny, he was reassuring. He was their home and host, circling around the Earth, not landing on the moon, waiting to pick them up and to take them home. They needed somebody of tremendous assurance, and that was Mike Collins. And Mike Collins, when he completed the mission, he didn't take the option, as he had, to be on another moon mission and to land and to walk on the moon. He thought, I've done what I was supposed to do. I did my part. I got them back safely. And that's, again, not about glory, but about some sense of the wider picture. And I think that also speaks so well of him. Not everybody, of course, was happy with it. This was a famous song by Gil Scott-Heron, where he sang Whitey on the Moon. A rat done bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the moon. Her face and arms began to swell. And Whitey's on the moon. She can't pay no doctor's bill, but Whitey's on the moon. And of course, during the launch, we had the Reverend Ralph Abernathy quite rightly protesting, if we can go to the moon, if you can spend this money, why can't we help poverty? Why can't we do that? Good question, an important question. And then afterwards, we even started to get the stories that this had all been cooked up. This was a complete fiction. This was indeed all done in some studio. It was faked. Amazing conspiracy theory. And the conspiracy theories were so ripe in the early 1970s. They were so ripe that you didn't even have to explain this scene from James Bond's Diamonds Are Forever. You didn't have to explain it because he runs onto the set and they're filming and somebody says, what the hell is he doing? Get him out of here. And then he takes a moon buggy and he goes off. No explanation. It's just, yeah, of course it was faked. This is extraordinary. This is how the culture developed. But now we are celebrating the 50 years, and we're back to an age of conspiracy theory. We're back to an age of people thinking the Earth is flat. So it matters. It matters that we hold on to this human achievement and to the idea that we did this collectively, that we did it as witnesses to what we could do to perhaps be on another planet. And with my research council, the Arts and Humanities Research Councils and UK Space Agency, we had a moon landing memories project where people were to send in their memories of watching the moon landing. And I was so proud because at the time of the moon landings, there was no internet. So I used to keep a diary and draw drawings of where they were in their mission. And the BBC picked this up and put it on their website. This is the proudest thing in my life. There's my boyhood drawing on the BBC website. If that little boy had known, wow, this is fantastic. A lot of use of the ruler, as one of my colleagues said, a lot of straight lines there, not much perspective. This is Chris Lee, who's now the head of UK Space, UK Space Agency, human space flight. Again, being inspired and watching this as a child, and has now gone into the whole process of looking after people. And of course, nowadays, because of the International Space Station, we're looking at the effects on the mind and the body. If we're going to travel further in space, we're going to have to put up with what space does to the human body. Here's what it does. Of course, your joints begin to crumble because they're not taking the pressure of gravity on you. Not only that, your insulin levels change. You can be at high risk of diabetes. Because the fluid is not rushing to your legs and it's going into your head, you often see this sort of puffy look. They look like hamsters, the astronauts. Their sinuses are completely engorged. They can't smell anything or taste anything. And because of the fluid in their head, it sometimes presses on the eyeballs and changes the shape of the eyeballs. So a lot of astronauts have permanent visual damage, can't correct it. And I remember talking to a space medic about this, and I said, "Oh, that sounds awful." And he said, "Space is an extremely hostile environment." Reminding us we were not built for this. We were just not built for this. This is not where we were meant to be. So as they train and as people think of the effects of the mind and the body, we have to think, how do people survive for 9 months if we're going to go to Mars? If we're going to go to Mars, you have to get them there in zero gravity for 9 months, still in peak condition, so that they've even got enough physical strength to open the door and get out. Nevertheless, never mind walking on the surface and finding out what to do. It's a huge challenge, enormous challenge.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below.
With a free trial, you can enjoy the full talk and thousands more.
Thank you for being part of the conversation.